Desert sun blazes. Ants swarm a woman's face buried alive. A mountain man digs desperately. "He promised," she whispers, her voice a dying rasp, revealing a horrifying betrayal that changes everything. Her impossible survival ignites a desperate quest for justice. What this lone rescuer uncovers next will shake the mountains. The Nevada desert was a land of stark, breathtaking contrasts, where the relentless sun painted the heavens in hues of scorching gold, and the nights descended with a chilling, star-studded embrace. In its heart, amidst canyons carved by forgotten rivers and peaks that clawed at the sky, lived Elias Thorne. His was a life hewn from rock and wind, a testament to raw endurance and an intimate understanding of nature's immutable laws. His hands, gnarled and powerful, bore the history of countless tasks, felling ancient pines, shaping sturdy logs into the walls of his remote cabin, carving tools from stone and iron. He moved with the quiet grace of a seasoned hunter, his eyes missing nothing, his ears attuned to every rustle of leaves, every distant cry of a hawk. His solitude was a sacred pact with the wilderness, a refuge from the superficiality he perceived in the distant settlements. He found truth in the bite of a winter wind, wisdom in the silent growth of a forest, and an unspoken integrity in the relentless cycle of predator and prey. His days were a rhythmic dance of survival, the sharp, clean scent of split timber filling the crisp morning air, the satisfying weight of his axe, the gentle glow of his forge casting dancing shadows against the rough-hewn walls of his cabin as he shaped metal, each clang a punctuation mark in the profound silence. On a searing afternoon, when the very air shimmered with heat above the cracked earth, Elias was drawn by an unsettling discord in the otherwise perfect harmony of the wilderness. A small, forgotten canyon, usually a place of dry, wind-swept quietude, held a fresh scar, a mound of recently disturbed soil that spoke of human intervention, clumsy and violent. His senses, honed to a razor's edge by a lifetime spent in nature's crucible, screamed a silent warning. He approached with the deliberate, low-to-the-ground steps of a stalking wolf, his gaze sweeping the desolate expanse for any sign of movement, any hint of the unnatural. What he found there, half concealed by thorny scrub and the pitiless sun, was a tableau of pure, unadulterated terror. A woman, her body cruelly confined by the earth's suffocating embrace, was buried up to her neck, her pale skin exposed to the sun's merciless glare. Her clothes were torn, her hair matted with dust and dried sweat. Near her head, a bustling ant colony, disturbed and driven by the intense heat, had begun its relentless, sickening advance. Thousands upon thousands of tiny black bodies swarmed with chilling efficiency, tracing paths across her exposed face, her eyes, her lips, a living, crawling shroud that intensified her silent torment into a waking nightmare. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, stared upwards, reflecting not the sky, but a bottomless well of despair and unimaginable fear. The sheer depravity of such an act, committed beneath the vast, indifferent canopy of the wild, struck a dissonant, searing blow to Elias's core. This was not the raw, necessary violence of the food chain, but the calculated, venomous cruelty unique to mankind, a crime against the very essence of life. He moved with a furious urgency, his powerful hands tearing at the dry, unyielding earth. The soil, gritty and hot, flew from his grasp as he worked with a speed he rarely displayed, his only focus, the fragile life trapped beneath. He carefully brushed away the multitude of ants, his touch, despite his rugged exterior, surprisingly gentle against her delicate, feverish skin. As she finally emerged, gasping for air, her body convulsing with shock and thirst, she collapsed against the unexpected anchor of his strength. Delirious, on the precipice of collapse, her voice emerged, a raw, broken whisper, uttering the name that would forever weave their destinies together. Her husband, she revealed, a man of standing and supposed respect in the distant town, a banker, had committed this monstrous deed. His insatiable greed, she rasped, had swallowed every sacred vow, every flicker of human kindness, leaving only cold calculation. Her name, a soft exhalation of breath, was Clara. as Elias held Clara, a fragile burden in his arms. A profound, unshakable realization settled upon him. He had always harbored a quiet disdain for the gilded pretenses of the townspeople, their hollow promises, their ceaseless hunger for wealth, believing it to be a force that corrupted the soul. The mountains had taught him the undeniable truths of existence, the value of honest labor, the integrity of a promise kept, the absolute clarity of deeds over deceptive words. This barbaric betrayal, this ultimate violation of trust and life, resonated with an ancient chord within him. It was more than a singular injustice against one woman. It was an egregious affront to the very sanctity of the wilderness, a dark stain upon the pure, untainted spirit of the land he had sworn, in his own silent way, to protect. He saw in Clara's brokenness not merely a victim, but a potent symbol of the desecration the civilized world wrought upon all it touched. A profound imbalance that demanded rectification, a silent guttural lament from the very earth itself. The sun, a fiery orb, began its slow, majestic descent, painting the western sky in hues of smoldering ember and deepening blood, a grim echo of the fierce resolve now hardening within Elias Thorne. He knew, with an absolute and unshakable certainty, that the quiet solitude he had so fiercely cherished, the peaceful rhythm of his days, had been irrevocably shattered. His path, once a solitary track winding through the wild, now led into the shadowed, dangerous valleys of human treachery. A new, unwanted journey, fraught with unforeseen perils and the bitter, searing taste of a vengeance that was not his own, yet now his to carry, stretched endlessly before him, illuminated only by the faint, flickering ember of justice he would now ignite for this woman, Clara. The arduous journey to Elias's cabin was a silent testament to Clara's will to survive and Elias's unwavering strength. He carried her through the deepening twilight, her fragile weight a stark contrast to the unforgiving terrain. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured as he navigated the treacherous paths, the cold, clean air of the higher elevations a balm to her fevered skin. The scent of sage and ancient pine filled the night, a natural medicine against the stench of dust and despair she carried. Clara clung to him, a trembling leaf in a gale, her mind flickering between the recent horror and the promise of sanctuary, her eyes occasionally fluttering open to reveal a haunted vulnerability that tore at Elias's stoic resolve. He knew this land, its whispers and its dangers, and he moved with a quiet urgency, shielding her from the predatory eyes of the night and the chilling touch of the mountain air. Once inside the rough-hewn walls of his cabin, a haven forged from his own hands and spirit, the transformation began. The air, thick with the comforting aroma of burning cedar and brewing herbs, enveloped Clara like a warm embrace. Elias, with a tenderness that defied his rugged exterior, laid her gently on a bed of fresh pine needles and thick furs. He cleaned her wounds with water warmed over the hearth, his movements slow and careful, like tending to a wounded fawn. He prepared simple, nourishing broths from wild game and medicinal mountain herbs, coaxing sips past her parched lips. Days blurred into a haze of fever and fitful sleep, punctuated by Elias's quiet ministrations. The solitary mountain man, accustomed to the silence broken only by the crackle of his fire and the distant howl of a wolf, found his world now filled with the shallow, rapid breaths of the woman he had saved and the subtle, fragile sounds of her struggle back to life. He watched over her, a silent sentinel, his heart, long a fortress, stirring with an unfamiliar sense of purpose. As the fever receded, leaving her weak but lucid, the truth began to unfold slowly, painfully, like a frost-bitten flower finally opening to the sun. Clara, her voice still raspy, but gaining strength with each passing day, recounted the unspeakable horror. Her husband, Silas Caldwell, a man whose name echoed with respect and influence in Silver Creek, a pillar of the community, had been the architect of her living tomb. She spoke of his charm, his carefully constructed facade of devotion, and the insidious greed that festered beneath. Her family's lands, a vast tract bordering the burgeoning mining territories, were the true prize, a fortune he coveted, with a covetousness that knew no bounds. He had arranged a hunting trip, lured her to that desolate canyon with promises of a shared future, only to deliver a future of dust and despair. He had buried her himself, she recounted, his eyes cold and devoid of all emotion, a shovel in his hands instead of a wedding band, convinced that the desert would claim her and guard his dark secret forever. Her words, though spoken softly, held the weight of granite, each syllable chiseling away at Elias's ingrained disdain for townfolk, replacing it with a searing personal outrage. This was not a random act of violence. It was a cold, calculated betrayal, meticulously planned, rooted in a darkness that transcended mere human flaw. Elias listened, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth, his face impassive, but his spirit raging like a winter storm. He had always known the cities spawned deceit, but this act of profound treachery, a husband burying his wife alive for land, was a violation of the most fundamental pacts, of marriage, of humanity, of the very earth itself. He saw the cold logic of Silas's plan: no body, no murder. The desert would be blamed, another tragic casualty of the unforgiving West. Silas had assumed the wilderness would be his accomplice, a silent witness to his crime, a vast, indifferent tomb. But he had not accounted for Elias Thorne, nor for the ancient, untamed spirit of the mountains that resonated deeply within the man. For Elias, this was more than merely rescuing a stranger. It was a sacred duty, a call to restore the natural balance that had been savagely broken. The land had cried out, and he, its silent guardian, had answered. Clara, too, underwent a profound transformation. The initial fragility, the lingering fear, began to recede, replaced by a steely glint in her eyes, a quiet determination that Elias recognized as the raw strength of the mountain itself. She had faced death, tasted its bitter dust, and found a reason to fight. Her survival was not merely a miracle. It was an act of defiance, a refusal to be extinguished. Her purpose became clear, fueled not just by a desire to live, but by a visceral, burning need for justice. She would not be a forgotten whisper in the wind. Elias watched her, seeing the embers of a formidable spirit rekindling. He understood then that this path, however dangerous, was not his alone. It was a shared journey, bound by an unspoken vow between two outcasts. One, a man who had sought refuge from the world's darkness in the mountains. The other, a woman cast out by that very darkness, now finding strength to reclaim her light. As the first tendrils of dawn crept over the snow-capped peaks, painting the horizon in a fierce, defiant orange, Elias stood by the cabin window, Clara a silent shadow beside him. The town of Silver Creek lay hidden far below, a cluster of false lights in the distance, oblivious to the storm brewing above. He had spent a lifetime avoiding its corrupted embrace, content in his solitude, protected by the rugged embrace of the peaks. But now, he saw it not as a place to be avoided, but as a place where an egregious wrong had been committed, a wound in the fabric of justice. His heart, long hardened by isolation, now beat with a resolute purpose, a deep-seated conviction that the silence of the wilderness had been broken, and only the echoes of justice could quiet it once more. He looked down at Clara, whose gaze held a cold, unwavering resolve that matched his own. Her past, once a tomb, was now a rallying cry. Together they would descend from their sanctuary, two solitary figures against the hypocrisy of a world that had betrayed them, ready to face the unknown, their shared resolve a silent, unbreakable promise whispered on the mountain wind. The journey to Elias's secluded cabin was less a path and more a primal ascent, a winding ribbon of deer trails and ancient game tracks that clung precariously to the mountain's rugged flank. For Clara, weakened and still reeling from her ordeal, each step was an act of profound will. Elias, a silent anchor, guided her, his hand firm at her back when the terrain grew steep, his eyes scanning the looming shadows of pine and rock for any sign of danger. The air grew thinner, sharper, carrying the scent of pine needles, wet earth, and the distant metallic tang of cold rock. The world below, with its sun-scorched plains and the memory of her living grave, receded with every upward climb, replaced by a growing sense of isolation, both comforting and terrifying. The cabin itself was a marvel of rustic engineering, built into the side of a craggy outcrop, its dark timber walls blending almost seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. Smoke curled lazily from its stone chimney, a beacon in the encroaching dusk. To Clara, it was both a refuge and a foreign land. Inside, the single room was Spartan, yet imbued with a profound warmth. A roaring fire and a massive stone hearth cast flickering shadows across walls adorned with curing herbs, tanned hides, and a meticulously organized array of tools. The scent of wood smoke, roasted game, and something earthy and wild, perhaps the very essence of the mountain, filled the air. It was the antithesis of the opulent, suffocating world she had known, a place stripped bare of pretense, where every object served a purpose, every corner told a story of survival. Elias, with a quiet efficiency, settled her by the fire. He offered her a mug of strong, bitter tea brewed from local plants, its warmth seeping into her chilled bones. Their initial interactions were sparse, filled with the unspoken language of shared trauma and cautious observation. He was a man of few words, his gaze direct and piercing, yet devoid of judgment. Clara, in turn, found herself studying him, this rugged stranger who had pulled her from the jaws of death. His face, weathered by sun and wind, was etched with a lifetime of solitude. But there was a depth in his eyes that spoke of profound empathy, a wisdom gleaned from the harsh lessons of the wild. She felt a flicker of hope, not for a return to her old life, but for the chance to simply be, to heal in this remote sanctuary. Yet, despite the sanctuary, an unspoken tension hung between them. Elias was a solitary creature, his life a carefully constructed rhythm of self-sufficiency. Her presence, a woman from the civilized world, threatened to disrupt that delicate balance. He watched her, not with suspicion, but with a cautious assessment, as if weighing the cost of her intrusion against the undeniable debt of her rescue. Clara, acutely aware of her vulnerability and dependence, felt the weight of her intrusion. She was a burden, a reminder of the treacherous world he had deliberately abandoned. She yearned to speak, to explain, to offer some form of recompense, but the words caught in her throat, overshadowed by the enormity of what she had endured. The silence between them was not empty, but filled with the unspoken questions of two souls, grappling with an unexpected, profound connection. One evening, as the first snowflakes began to dance outside the small, single window, Elias spoke, his voice a low rumble that resonated with the quiet power of the mountain itself. He had been preparing a meal of freshly caught trout, his movements practiced and precise. Without turning from his task, he laid out the undeniable truth of their situation. This cabin, this mountain, was his refuge, his livelihood. He could not, would not simply offer charity, for the wilderness demanded balance, purpose, and contribution from all who lived within its unforgiving embrace. His terms were clear, devoid of emotion, yet ringing with an honest pragmatism that Clara found strangely reassuring. His gaze finally met hers, a direct, unwavering assessment. He did not ask for a promise of payment in gold or silver, for those were trinkets of the world below, hollow and meaningless in his domain. Instead, he sought a different kind of currency. He allowed that she might stay, that his sanctuary would be hers, for a time. But in return, she must understand the deep, unbreakable compact of this place. She would contribute. She would learn. She would respect the unforgiving demands of the mountain. He spoke of chores, of tasks, of learning the ways of survival, not as a guest, but as a part of his world, however temporary. His words were not an invitation to comfort, but a stark, undeniable condition for survival, a chance to rebuild herself from the ashes of her past, forging a new strength in the crucible of the wild. The mountain, he seemed to say with his eyes, offered sanctuary, yes, but only in exchange for utility, for purpose, for a genuine respect for its untamed, unyielding heart. The early days in Elias's cabin were a brutal apprenticeship for Clara, a stark contrast to the pampered life she had known. The mountain showed no favoritism, and Elias, though not unkind, was a demanding mentor. He taught her to gather dry tinder for the fire, how to distinguish edible berries from poisonous ones, and the patient art of setting snares for small game. Her hands, once soft and accustomed to the delicate feel of embroidered silks, now grew calloused and chapped from splitting kindling and scrubbing cooking pots with rough sand. Each morning, the crisp mountain air stung her lungs as she hauled water from the stream, her muscles aching, but a new kind of strength slowly beginning to knit itself within her. Elias watched her, his silent assessments constant, noting her perseverance, her quiet determination, and the fierce refusal in her eyes to yield to the hardship. Initially, her contributions were hesitant, often clumsy. She fumbled with the axe, struggled to knead the rough flour for bread, and often burned the meager meals. Yet, she did not complain. Instead, she observed Elias with an almost desperate focus, mimicking his methodical movements, absorbing his tacit lessons. One frigid afternoon, while Elias was away tending his traps, a sudden fierce squall descended, threatening to extinguish the cabin's precious fire. Clara, recalling Elias's warnings about the mountain's unpredictable temperament, sprang into action. She stacked logs, carefully shielded the flickering flames, and, through sheer force of will, kept the heart of their sanctuary alive until he returned. He said nothing, but a subtle nod, a flicker of approval in his eyes, spoke volumes. It was a small victory, but it etched itself into her spirit, a testament to her growing resilience. As weeks turned into months, Clara's presence began to subtly, yet profoundly, transform the cabin. Elias's home, once a bastion of bare necessity and efficient survival, started to soften, to warm. It wasn't through grand gestures, but through small, almost imperceptible acts. Clara, with an innate understanding of comfort, began to bring order to the rough dwelling. She mended Elias's worn buckskin tunic with a needle and thread found in a forgotten pouch, her stitches surprisingly neat. She brewed fragrant teas from herbs she learned to identify and gather, easing the aches of a hard day's work. She baked simple, wholesome bread that filled the cabin with a comforting aroma, turning meals into something more than mere sustenance. Elias would return from a long hunt to find a bowl of steaming stew awaiting him, a clean cloth laid over the rough-hewn table, the cabin exuding a warmth that went beyond the fire in the hearth. This wasn't just survival. It was the quiet, insistent alchemy of a home being forged. Elias observed these changes with a growing, unspoken curiosity. He had once scoffed at the frills of domesticity, viewing them as unnecessary vulnerabilities in the harsh world he inhabited. Yet, the warmth of a mended tunic, the comforting scent of baked bread, the simple order Clara brought, began to chip away at his hardened solitude. He recognized in her actions not a desire for luxury, but a deep-seated instinct to create, to nurture, to make beautiful even the harshest of circumstances. It was a strength he hadn't anticipated, a quiet power that transformed the very air of his cabin. She wasn't simply surviving, she was thriving in her own way, slowly weaving a tapestry of warmth and quiet grace into the stark fabric of his life. Her resilience was not physical prowess, but an enduring spirit that refused to be broken, finding purpose and meaning in the most elemental acts of creation. One crisp autumn morning, a sudden piercing cry echoed from the nearby ridge. Elias, his senses on high alert, immediately recognized it as the distress call of a young mountain goat, caught in a rockfall. He grabbed his rifle and his pack, his face grim, and prepared to leave. Before he could step out, Clara, with a quiet urgency he hadn't heard before, approached him. Her hands, though still scarred from her earlier ordeal, now held a small pouch of carefully selected herbs and a roll of clean, torn linen. "For the wounds," she said simply, her eyes meeting his with an unwavering certainty. "They will need binding and balm against infection." Elias hesitated for a moment, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had considered only the immediate danger, the necessity of freeing the animal. Clara, with her gentle wisdom, had seen beyond the crisis, to the healing that would follow. It was a small gesture, yet profound. He took the pouch, a silent acknowledgement of her unexpected insight. As he disappeared into the dense forest, Clara watched him go, a quiet determination settling over her. The cabin was no longer merely a place of refuge. It was becoming a crucible, a silent witness to her transformation from a victim of circumstance to an active participant in the harsh, yet beautiful rhythm of mountain life. The new world had offered her sanctuary, and in return she was slowly, painstakingly, beginning to make it home. A week later, a ferocious blizzard descended upon the mountains with a terrifying suddenness, trapping Elias and Clara in their secluded cabin. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the shutters and clawing at the thick timber walls. Snow piled high against the windows, blotting out the already fading light, plunging the cabin into a frigid, oppressive darkness. Elias worked tirelessly, reinforcing the door, checking the chimney flue, his face etched with concern. The air grew thin inside the cabin as the stovepipe, strained by the relentless wind, began to pull smoke back into the room. A suffocating plume filled the small space, stinging their eyes and burning their lungs. Elias, coughing violently, fought to clear it, but the storm raged outside, making any outdoor repair impossible. Their visibility was reduced to mere inches, and the suffocating smoke was quickly turning the cabin into a death trap. Amidst the growing chaos, a desperate whimpering sound broke through the roaring wind, the faint cry of a trapped animal. It was a young mountain lion cub, caught in one of Elias's less severe traps, now shivering and mewling in the deepening snow just beyond their cabin wall. Elias, though a man of the wild, understood the brutal calculus of survival. Releasing it now, in the midst of the blizzard, would be a death sentence for them both. The cub, terrified and injured, would likely lash out, and the storm would claim them if they ventured too far. Yet he could not simply ignore the helpless creature. The cub's mother, he knew, would soon be on the hunt, drawn by its cries, turning their already precarious situation into a deadly confrontation. It was Clara who moved first, a sudden, surprising clarity in her eyes. Elias was torn between the cub's desperate plight and the immediate danger posed by the smoke-filled cabin. Clara, recalling her own terrifying experience of being trapped and abandoned, seemed to understand a deeper truth. She grabbed a heavy blanket and a coil of rope, her movements swift and decisive. "The smoke," she rasped, her voice strained. "We cannot breathe. The cub will draw its mother. We must bring it in, where we can tend to both. It will be safer here than out there, drawing a bigger threat." Elias, though initially hesitant, recognized the chilling logic in her words. Her instincts, honed by her own brush with death, were sharp. He saw the fire in her eyes, a reflection of the formidable strength that had returned her from the grave. Together they braved the narrow gap between the cabin and the rock face. Elias, using the rope, carefully secured the cub, while Clara, despite her fear, used the heavy blanket to calm its terrified struggles, murmuring soft, soothing words. They managed to bring the whimpering bundle inside, the cub, barely more than a year old, injured but alive. The smoke, however, was still thick, threatening to overpower them. Clara, with an unexpected spark of ingenuity, remembered stories of old trappers who used damp hides to seal leaks. She found Elias's tanned deer hides, soaked them in the remaining water, and, with Elias's help, meticulously sealed the gaps around the windows and the base of the chimney. Slowly, miraculously, the smoke began to recede, drawn up the flue by the now improved draft, and breathable air returned to the cabin. As the immediate dangers receded, replaced by the persistent wail of the blizzard, a quiet calm settled upon the cabin. The young cub, wrapped in furs, lay by the fire, whimpering softly as Elias, with Clara's help, gently cleaned and bandaged its injured paw. The crisis had broken the dam of their reserved silence. Clara, her face still smudged with soot, looked at Elias, her eyes filled with a raw, unspoken gratitude. She began to speak, her voice soft, weaving a tale of her life before Silas Caldwell, a life of quiet dreams and deep connections to her family's land, land steeped in generations of her ancestors. She spoke of her true love, a simple rancher, lost to a swift illness years ago, leaving her heart a wound that never truly healed. She spoke of the empty promises, the forced marriage, the suffocating loneliness even amidst the opulence. Elias, in turn, found himself speaking of his own ghosts, of a fierce protective love for his young wife, lost years ago to a rampant fever that swept through a logging camp, taking her swiftly and mercilessly. He recounted the grief that had driven him from the settlements, the feeling of utter helplessness that had turned his heart to stone. He spoke of the mountains as his only solace, his only refuge from a world that had taken everything. Their voices, low and intimate, mingled with the crackle of the fire and the roar of the storm outside. The shocking truth was not a grand external revelation, but the profound, agonizing honesty of their shared vulnerabilities. Two solitary outcasts, each bearing the deep, invisible scars of loss and betrayal, found themselves laying bare their deepest pains, not to strangers but to kindred spirits, sealing their partnership in the crucible of mutual understanding. As the first faint hint of dawn began to seep through the snow-laden windows, painting the cabin in a soft, ethereal glow, the blizzard's fury began to wane. The mountain lion cub, now resting peacefully, its paw expertly bound, stirred in its sleep. Elias watched it, a quiet marvel in his eyes. Then he turned to Clara, his gaze holding an intensity she had never seen before. He spoke of the trail ahead, of the inevitable descent to Silver Creek, where justice awaited. But his voice held a new note, a subtle shift in tone as he acknowledged the unspoken. "The cub will need careful tending," he murmured, his eyes lingering on her. "And the cabin, the warmth you have brought, these things, they require someone with your heart, Clara." It was not a question, but a quiet, profound invitation, a recognition of her irreplaceable value. He had found not just an ally in the fight for justice, but a fellow soul, a partner to share the burdens and the beauty of this harsh world. The cabin, once a symbol of his solitary defiance, now held the promise of a shared future, forged in the heart of a relentless mountain storm. With the blizzard's fury spent, a fragile calm descended upon the mountain. The world outside the cabin was transformed into a pristine, silent tapestry of white, sparkling under the clear, crisp winter sun. Inside, the lingering scent of wood smoke and pine now mingled with the comforting aroma of brewing coffee and simmering stew. The mountain lion cub, still weak but recovering, became a shared responsibility, its soft purrs filling the quiet moments, a testament to the unexpected life that had found sanctuary within their walls. Elias and Clara fell into an easy rhythm, a dance of shared tasks and quiet companionship. He taught her to track game in the snow, pointing out the subtle signs that only a seasoned eye could discern. She, in turn, showed him how to prepare poultices from winter herbs, her touch gentle and knowing as she tended to the cub's healing paw. Their days were woven with small, intimate gestures. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, the only sounds the crackle of burning wood and the distant hoot of an owl. Elias would carve intricate figures from wood, his powerful hands demonstrating a surprising delicacy, while Clara would mend their worn clothes, her needle a silent hum against the fabric. They shared stories, not of grand adventures, but of forgotten childhood memories, of the simple joys and poignant sorrows that had shaped them. He spoke of his mother's lullabies, sung beneath a vast star-strewn sky. She recalled the scent of her grandmother's garden, the vibrant colors of wildflowers. These quiet exchanges, these shared glimpses into their pasts, built a bridge between their solitary souls, transforming their initial alliance into a bond of profound, unspoken affection. The cabin, once a hermitage for Elias's grief, now resonated with a quiet warmth, a sense of belonging that neither had dared to dream possible. One evening, as Elias was sharpening his hunting knife by the firelight, Clara noticed a small, intricately carved wooden bird tucked away in a recess of the stone hearth. It was a meadowlark, its tiny form captured with exquisite detail. A profound sadness flickered in Elias's eyes as he spoke of it. It had been carved by his late wife, a gift from her father, a symbol of hope and freedom. Clara reached out, her fingers gently tracing the smooth lines of the bird, a pang of recognition in her heart. She then recounted how her own grandfather, a simple man with a deep love for the land, had carved a similar bird, a meadowlark, for her mother, and how it had been passed down to her. It was a family heirloom, lost when she was cast out. The coincidence, though seemingly minor, wove an unexpected thread between their pasts. It wasn't just a shared symbol, it was a subtle whisper of a connection that transcended time and place, suggesting that their paths had been destined to cross, their souls drawn together by an ancient, unspoken force, much like the meadowlark's song echoing across vast prairies, connecting distant lands. As spring slowly began its ascent, melting the last vestiges of winter snow, a sense of burgeoning hope blossomed within Clara. The cub, now fully recovered and playful, was released back into the wild, a poignant farewell that marked a passage of time, yet the tranquility of their sanctuary was not destined to last. One afternoon, as Elias and Clara returned from foraging, a subtle shift in the air, a faint disturbance in the usual harmony of the mountain, prickled at Elias's senses. He stopped dead in his tracks, his head cocked, his gaze sweeping the forest with an intensity that Clara had come to recognize as a precursor to danger. A distant glint of metal caught his eye, an unnatural flash against the deep green of the pines. Then, a whisper of smoke, too thin, too straight to be a natural fire, curled upwards from a lower ridge, a place where no trapper would build a camp. It was a signal, he knew, a calculated intrusion. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with a familiar, dangerous glint. Clara, following his gaze, felt a chilling dread creep into her heart. She saw the change in Elias, the subtle hardening of his stance, the focused intensity in his eyes. The peace they had so carefully cultivated, the quiet haven they had built, was about to be shattered. The world below, the one they had sought to escape, was not so easily outrun. It was coming for them, its shadow stretching long and menacing across their newfound home, a clear and undeniable threat looming on the horizon. The whisper of unnatural smoke from the lower ridge was not merely a disturbance. It was a declaration. Elias knew, with the cold certainty of a hunter, that the tranquility they had found was now a fragile illusion, poised to shatter. The threat had found them. The world Clara had fled, the darkness personified by Silas Caldwell, had not forgotten her. Its tendrils had snaked through the wilderness, guided by avarice and a festering pride, to their hidden sanctuary. Elias's cabin, once an impenetrable refuge, now felt like a fragile beacon drawing predators. The next morning, the signs were undeniable. Fresh tracks of shod horses, too numerous for stray travelers, scarred the moist earth leading up the lower slopes. The stench of stale tobacco and human desperation hung faintly in the air, foreign and offensive to Elias's discerning nose. Silas Caldwell, Clara's husband, had not given up. He had hired men, trackers with grim faces and cold hearts, undoubtedly promising them a rich reward for the return of his missing wife and the securing of her family's valuable lands. These men, Elias knew, would not be swayed by reason or mercy. They saw Clara as property, a means to an end, and Elias as a dangerous obstacle to be removed. Clara, her face pale but resolute, listened as Elias laid out the grim truth. Her past, the very entity that had tried to bury her, was now knocking on their door, a persistent, malevolent force. Elias, ever the protector, began to fortify the cabin, barricading the windows, sharpening his axe and cleaning his rifle, his movements imbued with a grim determination. He spoke of defending their home, of fighting for the life they had forged. But Clara saw beyond the immediate defense. She understood Silas. He would not stop. He saw her as a loose end, a living testament to his heinous crime, and he would pursue her relentlessly, no matter the cost. His goal was not merely to reclaim her, but to silence her forever. As Elias prepared for a siege, Clara's mind raced, searching for a solution that did not involve bloodshed on their sacred ground. She remembered a faded map in Elias's cabin, showing ancient trapping trails, one of which led to a precarious, seldom-used pass that circled high above the main trail, leading to a hidden cave system known only to a few seasoned mountaineers. It was dangerous, treacherous even in good weather, but it offered an escape, a chance to outwit Silas's men rather than engage in a direct, bloody confrontation. She shared her thoughts with Elias, her voice steady, her resolve hardening. "We cannot fight them here, Elias," she said, her eyes meeting his with an unwavering certainty. "They will burn this place to the ground, and for what? My life is not worth your home, your peace." Elias, though reluctant to abandon their prepared defense, saw the wisdom in her words. A direct confrontation would only lead to destruction, and perhaps their deaths. His gaze lingered on her, recognizing the fierce, protective love for their shared sanctuary that now burned within her. He knew then that the threat was not just to Clara, it was to the fragile family they had become. But the thought of her facing Silas's men, alone, was unbearable. He shook his head, a grim shadow crossing his face. "No," he rumbled. "We leave together or we stand our ground." But Clara, her spirit forged in the crucible of her near-death experience, had another, more desperate plan forming in her mind. Silas had buried her alive to inherit her family's lands. Her presence, a ghost returned, was his greatest fear, his most potent weakness. She knew how to draw him out, how to use his avarice and his fear against him. She would confront him not with a weapon, but with the terrifying, undeniable truth of her survival. She would offer herself, not as a victim, but as a lure, a sacrifice to buy Elias time, to lead Silas and his men away from the cabin, into a confrontation on her terms, on neutral ground, where the law of man, however corrupt, might still hold sway. She would be bait. As Elias argued vehemently against such a reckless plan, Clara stood firm, her gaze holding a profound, unwavering determination. "I am his wife," she stated, her voice imbued with a chilling authority. "He believes me dead. He will want me back if only to finish what he started to ensure his inheritance. I will go to him, but not as a prisoner. I will go as a phantom, as the living proof of his treachery. You, Elias, must follow, a shadow in the pines waiting for the moment. I will draw them away from here, away from our home." Elias, his heart heavy with dread, saw the unyielding resolve in her eyes. He knew he could not stop her. Her courage, born of her near-death experience, was a force unto itself. The threat had returned, and Clara, no longer merely a victim or a refugee, had chosen to become the weapon, a sacrifice for the greater good of their nascent family. She would face her past, not to reclaim it, but to bury it forever, even if it meant risking her own life in the process. The descent from the mountains was shrouded in a tense, silent understanding. Clara, dressed in sturdy buckskin Elias had fashioned for her hair braided tight, moved with a newfound resilience. Her eyes, once haunted by fear, now held a cold, unwavering purpose. Elias, a silent shadow among the pines, followed at a distance, his rifle ready, his heart a drumbeat of primal watchfulness. They moved toward Silver Creek, a town that had once been Clara's gilded cage, now a battlefield where her ghost would finally confront its tormentor. Silas Caldwell, emboldened by days of fruitless searching, had set up a crude camp at the base of the mountains, a desperate command post on the outskirts of Silver Creek. He was growing impatient, his facade of grief wearing thin, his hired men restless. Just as the afternoon sun began to dip, casting long, accusing shadows, a lone figure emerged from the tree line, walking with a deliberate, almost spectral grace. It was Clara. Her appearance sent a ripple of stunned silence through Silas's camp. She was no longer the fragile, broken woman he had left for dead. Her skin was tanned by the sun, her features sharpened by hardship, her gaze direct and unflinching. She was a living ghost, a terrifying testament to his monstrous crime. Silas, his face draining of color, stumbled forward, his shock quickly giving way to a desperate attempt at control. He blustered, demanding to know how she had survived, attempting to spin a narrative of her being lost and rescued. But Clara merely raised a hand, her voice, though soft, carrying an unshakable authority that silenced him. She began to recount her ordeal, her words cutting through the false niceties like a honed blade. She spoke of the hunting trip, the isolated canyon, the cold gleam in his eyes as he shoveled earth over her. She spoke of the ants, of the suffocating darkness, of the taste of dust and despair. Each word was a nail in his coffin, a truth undeniable. Silas, cornered and exposed, snarled, lunging for her. But Elias, a blur of motion, emerged from the trees, a protective barrier between Clara and her enraged husband. He moved with the quiet power of the mountain itself, his presence a stark, formidable counterpoint to Silas's panicked fury. He did not draw his weapon, but the sheer force of his presence, the primal strength emanating from him, was enough to make Silas's hired men hesitate, their eyes flicking nervously between the mountain man and their increasingly frantic employer. They were mercenaries, not murderers, and the living ghost of a woman, backed by a silent, formidable protector, presented a moral dilemma they hadn't anticipated. Clara, however, did not need Elias to fight her battle. She held up a small, leather-bound journal, its pages worn and faded. "This," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound power, "is a record of my family's land deeds, detailing every boundary, every claim for generations. And this," she continued, pulling a folded, tattered letter from her buckskin tunic, "is a sworn confession, written by your own cousin Silas, who you coerced into falsifying documents to seize my inheritance. He has seen the error of his ways, and sent this to me, by messenger, before your men could find him." The revelation hit Silas like a physical blow. Not only had Clara survived, but she had outsmarted him, turning his own treachery against him, exposing his intricate web of deceit with irrefutable proof. His own kin, the very instrument of his fraud, had betrayed him, sealing his fate. The hired men, now fully realizing the depths of Silas's depravity and the clear evidence against him, exchanged uneasy glances. They were not bound by loyalty to a man who would bury his own wife alive. One by one they began to melt away, unwilling to be entangled in the inevitable legal storm. Silas, his face contorted in a mask of impotent rage and terror, found himself utterly alone, stripped bare of his power and his carefully constructed lies. Elias stood silent, a sentinel of justice, his presence a stark reminder of the wilderness that had refused to claim Clara, a silent witness to the defeat of human avarice. As the last of Silas's hired men vanished into the shadows, a faint, chilling gust of wind swept through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else, a fleeting, almost imperceptible whisper of movement high on the ridges. It was a subtle, unsettling discord in the air, a reminder that while this particular evil had been conquered, the vast untamed world held other dangers. A sense of unease settled upon Elias, a hunter's intuition that not all threads of the conflict had been neatly tied, that perhaps a smaller, less obvious shadow had slipped away to bide its time in the hidden corners of the mountain. Silas Caldwell was broken, defeated, his fate sealed by the living truth of his victim. But the wilderness, in its infinite wisdom, offered no absolute guarantees, only the promise of continued vigilance. 9 months later, the mountain cabin was no longer merely a dwelling. It was a vibrant, beating heart of life. The seasons had turned, painting the peaks in lush greens and fiery golds, and with them, the lives of Elias and Clara had blossomed anew. The scent of fresh-baked bread, mixed with the ever-present aroma of pine and wood smoke, now regularly filled the air, mingling with the soft gurgle of a newborn. Elias, the solitary mountain man, was solitary no longer. His gnarled hands, once only accustomed to the rough feel of wood and rock, now moved with an almost comical gentleness as he cradled his infant son, a tiny bundle swaddled in soft furs. Clara, her eyes shining with a profound, peaceful joy, watched him, a quiet smile gracing her lips. She was no longer the fragile, haunted woman buried alive. She was strong, radiant, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Her days were a tapestry woven with domestic tasks and the boundless love for her new family. She brewed nourishing teas, prepared simple, wholesome meals, and, with Elias's help, tended a small, flourishing garden nestled in a sun-drenched patch behind the cabin. The silence of the mountain was now punctuated by the happy cries of their child, a sound that Elias, once a man of stoic quietude, had come to cherish above all else. Their home was a sanctuary not just from the world, but within themselves, a place where wounds had healed and new life had taken root. The tale of Clara's miraculous return from the grave and Silas Caldwell's downfall had spread like wildfire through the scattered settlements, cementing his ignominious fate in a federal prison. But a different legend began to whisper through the mountain passes. It was said that the land itself had rejected Silas Caldwell's cruelty, that the spirits of the ancestors, bound to Clara's family lands, had intervened, guiding her to Elias, a guardian chosen by the wilderness. It was a story woven from the fabric of the mountains, a belief that Clara's survival was not merely a twist of fate, but a sacred act, a testament to the enduring power of justice and the ancient, protective spirit of the high country. Their son, born under the watchful eyes of the ancient peaks, was seen by some of the few trappers and prospectors who ventured near as a child of the mountain, a symbol of the land's continued blessing, a new lineage rooted in strength, honesty, and a profound respect for the wild. In the quiet evenings, as the stars blazed in the impossibly dark sky, Elias and Clara would sit by the fire, their child sleeping soundly between them. He would trace patterns on her hand, a silent gesture of his deep affection. She would lean into him, finding solace and strength in his solid presence. The journey had been arduous, fraught with despair and danger, but it had led them here to this moment of profound peace. They had found not merely a partner, but a soulmate forged in the crucible of shared adversity. Their home was not a grand estate, but a humble cabin, warmed by love, echoing with laughter, and protected by the towering strength of the mountains. His voice, soft and resonant, lingered on the profound truth of their story. Courage, it reflected, was not always found in grand battles, but often in the quiet, insistent determination to survive, to rebuild, to choose life even after staring death in the face. Family, they had learned, was not defined by blood alone, but by the unbreakable bonds forged in loyalty, sacrifice, and the unwavering choice to protect one another. And home, that elusive longing of the heart, was not a fixed place on a map, but a sacred feeling of belonging, of safety, of profound connection woven between two kindred spirits who had dared to trust, to love, and to build a future together amidst the untamed majesty of the high mountain wilderness. Their tale, a testament to enduring love and the triumph of the human spirit, echoed through the vast, silent canyons, a timeless melody whispered on the wind. Did you enjoy this journey? Tell us from what corner of the world you're watching this story from. Leave your comment, and to make sure you don't miss the next adventure, subscribe to the channel.